Hello, my name is Sue. I am a master certified life coach, a certified mental health coach, and a speaker. And I appreciate you joining me today. We're going to talk about the inside life of an eating disorder. Eating disorders have a lot of stereotypes to them. And I want us to really talk about what it's really like to have an eating disorder because I have one. And before we go too far, this is a judgment free zone. I want you to feel safe and comfortable typing any question or comments you have in the chat. I'll be happy to get in there and respond and interact with you as well. But I want this to be just a chance where we can talk. I want to share a little bit about my story, and I want to help educate and equip you because you don't have to be an expert to help somebody else. And that's what this whole thing is all about. So I'd like to share my screen with you. And what I'm going to share with you is really about an hour-long presentation. And I wanted you to know that I've done my best to condense it. I will have an opportunity for you to, at the end, if you want some more information, to go ahead and reach out to me. But in the chat, if you would, real quick, just write a couple things. What comes to mind when you think about eating disorders? And what do you know about them, or what don't you know about them? And again, it's safe to put anything down there, because usually when someone hears the word eating disorder, they think of someone who's skin and bones, or maybe overweight, or a binge eater, or something like that. And those can be accurate, but there is so much more to it as well. Because I have an eating disorder. And I'd like you in the chat, if you would, and I'm not going to be offended. When I told you I had an eating disorder, just give me a little shout out, a hand raise, a me, or whatever in the chat. And just let me know how many of you thought you don't look like it. And I'm going to raise my hand because I thought that too. And I'll kind of get into that a little bit. We're going to go move. We're going to move real fast because we don't have a lot of time. And there is so much to know about eating disorders that I can't cover it all. So this is going to be a really thumbnail sketch for you. There are 5 eating disorders that appear in the DSM-5, which are recognized for medical diagnoses. There's anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, binge eating, ARFID, which stands for avoidance restrictive food intake disorder, and OSFED, other specified feeding and eating disorder. OSFED is the eating disorder that I have. So anything I share today is going to be from that frame of mind. But at the same time, the things that I have experienced and struggled with are very common throughout any type of eating disorder, because the disorders all have a lot of similarities to them, and just how they show themselves in each individual situation is different. Now, there are 7 other eating disorders that mental health practitioners recognize. These are not yet in the DSM-5, but there's a lot of research going on for these. And I'm not going to get into a lot of these. Again, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to get you more information about these. But muscle dysmorphia, compulsive overeating, and some of these other ones, Prader-Willi, diabulimia, selective eating, drunkorexia, and pregorexia. Those are big names which have a lot of stuff to them. Some of them have to do with using medication or something within a medical diagnosis, like drunkorexia, or actually diabulimia is a better one, is where they use some of their diabetes, and it impacts their eating behavior with bulimia as well. So it's really complicated, too complicated for me to try to explain to you in 25 minutes. So, but that's mainly the idea here, is that there are more than just the big three. The big three are anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating. There are many more besides that. I'd like to share a little bit about my story. Again, I'm going to condense this greatly, but I am a childhood rape survivor. I have a lot of trauma in my background, and that was just the first thing. From there, it just transpired. Everything just continued to build off of that. If you are aware about trauma, you know it literally rewires your brain. So my brain was rewired at a very, very early stage. So I was not thinking correctly. Throughout the course of the next 15 years, before I told somebody about the rape, yes, I developed my eating disorder, but I considered killing myself twice. I had suicidal thoughts twice. I I mean, so many different things. I'm sorry. There's things like my best friend, just a lot of rejection. When I was 16 years old, my best friend said I wasn't invited to a going away party because her other friends didn't like my personality. In between everything as well, my parents have divorced after 34 years of marriage. There was other sexual abuse besides just the rape. There was so much trauma, and my brain was not processing things correctly. My eating disorder really started taking root in high school when I started eating alone. But it really took root even more and started showing itself in different ways in college. I used a phrase that I didn't realize at that point in time was a red flag about a potential eating disorder. And I told people I was deathly afraid of gaining weight. Now, I went to a small college in Northwest Ohio, and we had one cafeteria. So, because my brain was not processing things correctly, and because I was not taking care of it and feeding myself correctly, I was not processing things. So, over time, paranoia kind of set in. And what I mean by that is that I became very uncomfortable in the dining hall. And I would feel like everyone, in quotes, was watching me. And while I had a very basic human need, I may have enjoyed another serving of food. While that is normal, my mind transitioned it to if everybody sees me going up for more food, they're going to know Sue has a need. And God forbid Sue have a need because I had set the persona, I had painted the picture, I had worn the mask that Sue was good, Sue was golden, and Sue didn't have any problems. Sue was your go to gal. So for me to have a need meant I was going to be found out. And here's what some different things as I share a little more of my story in a little bit here is that eating disorders are about control, and they're specifically about control of emotions because I did not tell anyone about my rape for 15 years until my senior year of college. So you can imagine going through middle school and high school and almost all of college with this weighty secret that I didn't know how to process. And because my brain was rewired at a critical age when life development is just starting, I did not know how to control things. So I controlled it by making everybody think I was okay when I was really dying on the inside. Next thing to realize about eating disorders are they are not a fad. They're not about vanity. They're not even about losing weight, and they're not about dieting. They are rooted in a combination of things. Yes, there is genetic, there's biology, but here's the crux. They are treatable mental health disorders. Eating disorders right now are the second most lethal of all eating disorders, of all mental health issues. It used to be number one. It is now number two, only to opioid addiction. And the bottom line is that eating disorders are about emotional struggles that show themselves through the relationship with food. And I never heard that phrase before about relationship with food, but that is really key because that's how things are interpreted. Food, for whatever reason, becomes the enemy. I talked about wearing a mask and wanting people to believe that I was okay. And what it boiled down to is if I stayed busy, I didn't have to think. And if I didn't have to think, I didn't have to feel. Because remember, there's all these emotions stirring underneath that I didn't know how to deal with. And eating disorders are about controlling your emotions. So I didn't want to feel. So if I stayed busy, I didn't have to think. If I didn't have to think, I didn't have to feel. And if I didn't have to feel, I didn't have to deal with my stuff. I didn't want to deal with my stuff because it hurt too much and I didn't know how to deal with it. And there was just so much that went with it. It's also important to note that eating disorders are not about dieting, is what I mentioned a minute ago, but that diet culture is a lie. And I know that may step on some toes and that goes against the norm. It's 3 months since New Year's, and all you hear about on New Year's is about people's weight goals. And while those are valid goals, how we go about them is concerning because diets are based on restriction and diets deny the body the nutrients God has designed our body to need. And I'm going to say that again. Diets are based on restriction and they deny the body what God has designed it to need. Now, that you might be thinking, but how am I supposed to get to my weight goal? What I've learned from my dietitian is that a consistent, balanced eating is the key because you want to stabilize your metabolism. Now, I mentioned a dietitian. I didn't get into, I found a counselor in 2008, but it was another 6 years before I even got into dealing with the rape with her. So it was just 2014 when I really started dealing with something that happened over 4 decades ago. So because emotions are the enemy of an eating disorder and we're dealing with trauma, my emotions are all coming up. So my eating disorder started showing its red flags. For me, one of my red flags is when I open the refrigerator door and I'm overwhelmed with food choices. So then I shut it and I snack because when I was in college, I learned to shut off my hunger because I got uncomfortable. So when I would have enjoyed getting another serving of food, I learned to shut off my hunger. I shut off my hunger. I dumped my tray and I got out of Dodge and I snacked in my room later. So these some of these things I'm going to share with you are things my dietitian has helped me learn over the last, it's been 8 years now or 7 years. So, but just that consistency. Now, with that, one of the things that Kristen is my dietitian, one of the things early on, she really helped me figure out and understand that I am not my eating disorder. And what I mean by that is that in the eating disorder community, you might hear people talk about their eating disorder voice. It's really helpful to give our eating disorder a name. And I gave mine the name of Ed. And early on, as I was talking with Kristen about my red flags and about shutting off my hunger and not being able to make food choices and just all the stress and anxiety and fear that I felt with that, she kept using a phrase and she said, "That's your eating disorder voice." And I never heard that phrase before. And she kept helping me understand that I am not my eating disorder. And over time, it helped me start separating from my eating disorder. And that's a critical point, is being able to separate the behavior, which is the eating disorder, from the person. And I still remember the day at the office of the kitchenette. I was hungry. I went to the refrigerator and that red flag came up. I got overwhelmed. I shut the door. I'm like, I can't do this. I can't make a choice. I don't know what, I don't know. I just can't. I'll just go snack. And I was learning, I working with Kristen, that one trick that eating disorder folks use is that whatever your eating disorder is telling you, do the opposite. So even though my Ed voice was sitting there telling me you can't make a choice, I started realizing that as my eating disorder voice because my brain started getting clearer. And I literally remember it was like my brain split. And I was like, no, Ed. And up to this point in time, I had, as I started becoming aware of things, I would literally say out loud, not for a lot of people to hear, but enough for me to hear, say, Ed, shut up. Ed, shut up. So this day in the kitchenette said, Ed, shut up. And I opened the refrigerator door and I got out a yogurt. And that was when I started realizing that I was getting more clear in my thinking. Now, eating disorders are addictions. But the kicker to this is that in every other addiction, you have to avoid the issue, avoid the whatever you are addicted to in order to survive. With eating disorders, you have to face it. You will not live if you do not face down your eating disorder addiction. And it's an addiction with food. And just like anything else, the hardest thing is to reach out. It's really critical to understand these as eating disorders. And not as eating disorders, I'm sorry, as addictions, because that really helps frame things. Eating disorders have such judgment around them. They have such accusation around them. Some of those stereotypes I talked about a few minutes ago about it being about vanity or dieting gone wrong or anything, and all those lies, all that is tied to it. When we start seeing eating disorders as addictions, it helps us understand that it is a mental health issue, that yes, it also has biological and physical ramifications. I said earlier that eating disorders are the second most lethal of all mental health issues. That is not only because of the suicide that is involved with eating disorders, but it is also because of the damage that is done to our bodies. I have OSFED, which means other specified feeding and eating disorder. And that means that I don't meet all the diagnostic criteria for anorexia or any of the other eating disorders, but I have disordered eating. For me, again, it showed in being deathly afraid of gaining weight. I would call it odd eating behaviors or anorexic tendencies, but I never called it an eating disorder. And those around me didn't know how to address it either. And that's one of the reasons that I share this presentation across the country. Some of the potential warning signs, and you may have heard these, you may have seen them, you see them on the internet. Excuse me. I've mentioned it already. Preoccupation with weight loss or food, maybe hiding food or avoiding food-centered activities, which, if you think about it, is huge, because how many activities, especially around the holidays or graduations or events, center around food? And honestly, for someone with an eating disorder, that increases the anxiety, and we become very creative with how we can avoid going up to the food table or feeling like we're being watched if we're eating. Some of the things I said already, words we use, like I'm deathly afraid of gaining weight. Maybe folks, you see someone dressing in layers or baggy clothes to hide the weight loss. We are, it's April now, and we're getting into the time of season where winter clothes starts getting put away. Quite frankly, this is the hardest time of year for me because I've been able to hide behind a hoodie and just a single hoodie. I don't wear a lot of layers, but I feel more comfortable with at least another shirt and an overshirt. So now when we're getting into the time where you might wear shorts or you might throw on a short sleeve shirt or something, I find myself getting very self-conscious. So it's something I go through every year, and I know it's coming, it's happening right now. For some, because they feel like they need to purge their body of the nutrients or the weight or the calories. They use laxatives or excessive exercising. And can I say real quick that calories are simply a unit of energy? That's all they are. I know people count calories or talk about burning calories. It's really just a unit of energy. Food is fuel. Food is not the enemy. And here's one that I go around with my doctor about, because I have asked her to not put my BMI in my chart because BMI and weight are not valid indicators if an eating disorder is present, because it's about the behavior. It's not about the numbers. And what I mean by that, just briefly, is that a BMI talks about your body mass index, but it does not take into consideration muscle weight. Muscle is more dense than fat, and yet it increases the body weight. So, for example, I was in PT a year or two ago, and I gained muscle weight because of PT. Now, I went to the doctor, and if you had told me that I was going to weigh what the scale said I weighed, I probably would have freaked out. And I freaked out a little bit, and I talked to my dietitian about it, and I was good with it after that. And she was the one that helped me see again that it's muscle, because muscle doesn't take up as much space, but it still weighs as much, if not more than fat. So that's why BMI is not a good indicator, because it doesn't take into consideration. If my height and weight, the BMI chart says I'm overweight, but I'm not. I'm just solid. And I've never been this solid before because I've given my muscle, my skeletal structure, what it needs to properly support me. Now, I want to talk real quick about the biblical perspective of recovery, because this is the critical part. Is that Galatians talks about needing to bear one another's burdens. And this is more than just pray through it. Yes, prayer is critical, but it is bearing one another's burdens is more than just that. And I love this quote from godquestions.org. The word burden means a weight of personal and eternal significance. It can mean a character flaw, a struggle, or a moral requirement. So we are directed right there to bear one another's burdens. 1 Corinthians, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. We believe that the Holy Spirit resides within our bodies. We are a temple of the Holy Spirit. And how we focus and interact with food is important because that is how we take care of our temple. And I love, again, the biblicalnutritionist.com is another great resource. Food and how you relate with it is important. So just those two verses right there give us a mandate that we are to care for others, even if we're not really sure how to go about it. And again, that's what we're talking about here. Now, yes, God heals directly through prayer. Yes, God wants to use others to heal as well. So I'm going to be pretty direct about a couple things here, because I know there are some in the church globally who believe that we only need to pray things away. Now, stay with me for a minute. Not taking care of our bodies is sin. We just established that with those verses from Galatians and Corinthians. If we go to a doctor for illness, why would we treat mental struggles any differently? Because mental is in the brain. The brain is an organ. Your heart is an organ. Your lungs are an organ. Your stomach is an organ. You have so many, your eyes. We have different organs in our bodies, and we go to doctors so that we continue to take care of them. Why do we treat mental struggles any differently? It's only because of the stigma. They are biologically based because our bodies are not yet perfect. Yes, we pray for healing, but I fear that sometimes we skip the part where God wants to use humans to heal through the gifts and the talents he has given them. He has gifted our medical doctors. We go to them for healing. Why are we ashamed to go to a doctor of the brain for healing? I don't see a difference. And here's the kicker. To address mental health concerns as just a repeat prayer request is not loving, and it's not being the hands and feet of Jesus. I have not come to any other conclusion in my studies. If you have one, please share it in the chat. I don't mean to be divisive, but I want to share, and I want to challenge, and I want to, again, equip. And that's what I want to run into right now, is how can you help? This is just a short list of things. The first one is just realize you don't have to be an expert. You just have to care. And I know you care or you wouldn't be here. And I know you care because you want God's best for yourself and for those around you. Understand and educate yourself about some of those warning signs. There are so many others that we haven't had time to look into. And here's a real critical part. Discern for yourself. Are you the right person to say something? All of us have had a time where something needs to be said to us, but by golly, you better be the right person. Because if you're not, I'm not going to listen to you. That is even more critical here, because if you are intervening in a person's life, it could literally be life or death. Remember, it's the second most lethal, only behind opioid addiction. You care, you want to help. Make sure you're the right person. And if you're not, then be sure as well that you have those resources. And that's some of what we're going to cover here real quick as well. I love that quote from Dr. Eileen Homey. Trust is the grease that makes the engine run. And when you are talking with somebody, when you're approaching them about your concerns, I statements are huge. I am concerned when I've seen you do that, when I've noticed this, I've observed this. Observable behavior cannot be denied. If you have observed it, It's not hearsay. It's not making it up. You have seen somebody in that environment do something that has concerned you. Focus on the observable behavior. If you need to make a referral and see it through, and that might be, and some of this is geared, I've done this on college campuses and at national conferences. So some of this is geared for the educational setting, these next few points coming up, but they apply as well to a mom or a teacher or anywhere else, or a pastor or a counselor. Make a referral if you need to and see it through. Somehow help that referral happen. Don't just give a name, but maybe call and say, ask permission. Can we make that call now while we're here so that you know it's happened? Again, know that eating disorders are addictions. They require professional, specialized, and often a team approach. I have a counselor, I have a dietitian. I have not needed to go to treatment, inpatient, or there's in treatment, there's residential, there's intensive outpatient, there's partial hospitalization. There are a number of different treatment levels. At one point in time, when I was losing weight, as my counselor and I were dealing with the rape, she was ready. She looked at me and said, I think you might need a good treatment. Because then I'm talking inpatient or intensive outpatient. And she knew I needed to keep working. She said, you got one more chance. Prove to me you can gain weight. We haven't had that conversation since. But you need to have that team approach because each part plays a part in something else. Kristen helps me deal with the eating part, while Amanda, my counselor, helps me deal with all the other issues behind it. This is a critical one. Watch your words. Please don't be focused on appearance. And please, food has no morality. It's not good or bad. It's you're eating, but not appearance focused. Not, oh, you've lost weight. I've noticed, hey, you're losing weight. That can be so validating with someone who has anorexia that you've just encouraged them to continue their behavior, not knowingly. But that's why we're talking about these things, because we don't realize how powerful our words can be on the negative side. Evaluate your personal misunderstandings. We've talked just a little bit about that. And here's the other part. Get help if you need it. The statistics say that somebody watching this video, sitting in on this conversation right now, is struggling with an eating disorder or knows someone who is. You don't have to be an expert to help them. You just have to care. But if you are the one also struggling, reach out. On the college campuses, on high school campuses, there's a bunch of different programming that can take place. There's NEDA Week. That's usually the last week of February every year. Mental Health Awareness Week in May. There's new in 2019 was a Weight Stigma Awareness Week. Up at Kent State, they have different campus groups. There's one called the Nightingale Project. Holiday campus meals are really big, especially on college campuses, and they can be the most stressful thing for someone with an eating disorder, because here you are in an environment where you're supposed to be happy and jolly, and you're forced to sit down in a group of people you may or may not know and eat. And that can be really, really gut-wrenching. And then staff development and training. And that goes beyond just the educational field. I've had opportunity to talk about eating disorders at warehouses and in manufacturing, and then all kinds of different places. I did a presentation earlier this year for a counseling office and the health services office at a university up in Minnesota. Now, we have covered a lot, and I know we're running tight on time. I'm happy to answer questions. Throw them in the chat. I will be there. Happy to also to continue this conversation afterwards. You can go to SueBowles.com to reach out to me. If you scan that QR code right there, I have everything we talked about how to, you don't have to be an expert, some of those tips and more, I have in a handout. You can scan the QR code. It'll take you to the website. Send it in your email. You'll get the email with the link to it right away. If there's something else I can help you with, please go to my website and reach out to me. I want to help you. Again, this is usually an hour-long presentation that I've tried to condense into about 28 or 29 minutes. And I know I've just touched the thumbnail, but I appreciate your time. I appreciate your interest and your desire to help. And my job is to help your job be easier. So, whatever I can do to help you, please reach out. Thank you. Have a good day.